I'm Matilda Mallinson.
And I'm Tamara Himani. It's Thursday, the 15th of January.
Today, with harrowing, exclusive first-hand testimonies, we're covering rape and sexual torture in Israeli prisons. On Wednesday, the US announced the start of the second phase of the Gaza ceasefire, but behind bars, Palestinian witnesses tell us thousands detained in Israeli custody are facing a vicious form of warfare.
2 Palestinian former prisoners have spoken exclusively to Middle East Eye about shocking experiences of sexual abuse at the hands of Israeli prison guards. A warning that their accounts contain details of extreme sexual violence and that these may be referred back to throughout the show.
انتقلت لسجن مجده بعد 19 يوم، وكل ما حدث معي هو في أول يوم دخولي لسجن مجده، أو قدرت إني أنا أحدد إنه هم من 4 ل 6 أشخاص. ولما رموني على الأرض وأنا لسه يعني مش شايف إشي، نزعوا البنطلون ونزعوا البوكسر، قالوا لي يلا على ركبك على ركبك على ركبك. بدأوا بالضرب على كل أنحاء جسمي وبدون يعني خطوط حمراء. شعرت إني أنا قريب من الموت، يعني الألم شديد جدا. فكنت بنتظر شو المرحلة القادمة بعد الضرب. ليش لجلحوني البنطلون؟ شعرت إنه في إشي قاعد بيحاول يدخل في منطقة المستقيم، بس الإشي صلب، يعني مش إنسان بيحاولوا يدخلوا إشي في منطقة. لا شعوريا أنا كإنسان حاولت إني أمنع، أشد على حالي، أمنع الإشي هذا يدخل في منطقة المستقيم. تعرضت لألم مضاعف، ففلتت، خلص استسلمت لهذا الموضوع، وشعرت إنهم سكبوا على مؤخرتي شيء لزج ما عرفت شو هو، مع تحريك، مع التواء، مع حركات بتسبب ألم أكثر مضاعف لدخوله في منطقة المستقيم. شو بدي أعمل؟ مش عارف شو بدي أعمل. أنا ما كنت أصرخ، ولكن كنت أصدر أصوات، يعني إنه بتألم، لحد إنه في حدا مد إيده من تحت ومسك المحاشم أو الخصاوي وضغط عليهم بشكل عنيف جدا. هون أنا صرخت صوت ما بعرف هو طلع برا مجده ولا ما طلع، وبدأ يشد في القضيب كمان ألم إضافي على الألم اللي هو بشد على الخصاوي، مع عملية الاغتصاب إدخال وإخراج. أنا تمنيت إني خلص يعني خلص أفارق الحياة في هاي اللحظة، لأنه مش قادر. تجربتي أنا كسامي نقطة في بحر من تجارب كثير أسرى تعرضوا لأبشع من اللي أنا تعرضت له، وتحديداً أسرى قطاع غزة. يعني أنا بهاي الطريقة خرجت من الحالة النفسية اللي أنا كنت بعاني منها، إنه أقارن اللي تعرضت له مع اللي تعرض له الكباري اللي بخرف فيي.
Thank you for staying with us for what we realise is an extremely difficult testimony to hear. But what is difficult to hear is even more difficult to share, not to mention potentially dangerous for those speaking out. This is why we ask you, if you can, to hear their words. That first speaker was Palestinian journalist Sami al-Sai from the occupied West Bank. Our next speaker asked to remain anonymous, and as a Palestinian from Gaza, the abuse he recalled is even more severe. If you would prefer not to watch his interview right now, you can take a pause and rejoin the show after 3 minutes.
بطلب انه تتظلل صورتي مش خوف. انا مش خايف من حدا، انا خايف على اولادي في يوم من الايام انه حدا يعايرهم انه انت اللي ابوك عمل فيه الكلب. مجرد انه وضعت اجرك في سجن عوفر انت هان تركت خلفك انسانيتك الحقيقيه. الحدث الاعظم واللي هذا اللقاء هو مقام علشانه كان بتاريخ 15/1. أخذوني على الحمام طبعا مع ضرب شديد وعنيف. أنا هون صرت في حالة نصف سجود على ركبي، مؤخرتي ظاهرة وأعضائي الحساسة ظاهرة برضو من الخلف. تم ضربي على أعضائي الحساسة من الخلف، جندي كان واقف صار يضرب فيي برجله. يعني أنا مش قادر أحدد كان الألم في راسي اللي داعس على راسي كان ضاغطه، ولا هو اللي بده يخلع كتافي وإيدي، ولا هو اللي بضربني من تحت. بعدين سمعت، أو مش سمعت، شعرت في أنفاس سخنة، شعرت بأنفاس سخنة على مؤخرتي. بعدين سمعت تبع الكلب، كنت أنا يعني بنساش صوته من قبل، فبيحكي مع الكلب بألفاظ يعني أنا ما فهمت غير كلمة ميسي، وكأنه الكلب اسمه ميسي، وطلب منه بلغة بينهم الاثنين إنه يعمل إشي. فبتفاجئ الكلب إنه بيركبني ويبدأ بمجامعتي كمجامعة أنثى من جنسه. يعني شعرت بعضو الكلب وهو يلامس جسمي، وشعرت في ايديه وهن ماسكت لي من ظهري، وشعرت في لعابه وهو بينزل علي، وانا بصرخ وبحكي له لا مشان الله يعني، وبحاول اشد على حالي حتى ما يتمكن مني الكلب. استمر الحدث تقريبا 3 إلى 4 دقائق هذا الامر، ونتيجة صراخي نزلوا في ضرب في العصي، انه ليش بصوت وليش بصرخ، لاني ازعجت جناب الكلب. انا حالي من 11,000 موجودة في السجون، حالة واحدة وال11,000 متشابهات هي كربوني.
The Israeli prison service told MEE that it categorically rejected these allegations, but they pile onto mounting evidence of abuse, including footage leaked by Israel's former chief military advocate last year that appears to show Israeli soldiers sexually abusing a Palestinian prisoner. A UN inquiry published in March last year accused Israel of using sexualized torture and rape as a method of war to destabilize, dominate, oppress, and destroy the Palestinian people.
There are roughly 9,300 Palestinians currently in Israeli prison under these circumstances, around a third of whom remain in administrative detention. This means they are held without charge or trial based on secret evidence they are not allowed to see. The number of prisoners doubled in the wake of October the 7th and is almost the highest it's been since the Second Intifada in 2000.
But it's not just the number that's increased. Under the oversight of National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who came into office at the start of 2023, this imprisonment has also become more deadly.
אלה כל הנוח'בות, גיבורים, על הילדים, על הנשים, על התינוקות שלנו. תראו איך הם היום. מינימום של מינימום תנאים, אבל יש עוד משהו שחייבים לעשות. עונש מוות למחבלים.
The second speaker you heard in the earlier interviews told us that Ben-Gvir was present during one of his beatings and was, quote, laughing and gesturing like a director. Under these conditions, at least 110 prisoners are known to have died in Israeli custody since October 2023. The true number is believed to be higher.
Today on MEE Live, we examine, is Israel's treatment of Palestinian captives getting worse? As the Gaza ceasefire progresses to the next phase, has Israel simply moved its warfare behind bars?
How are Israel and its allies responding to reports of systemic rape and sexual torture? And how did it ever get this far?
One of the people most familiar with Israel's abuse of Palestinian prisoners is Arab Barghouthi, whose father, former Palestinian political leader Marwan Barghouthi, has been imprisoned by Israel since 2002. Though both Israeli and Palestinian political figures have argued that Barghouthi's release could provide Palestinians with the leadership to reach a two-state solution, Israel's government has refused to release him. Now, we'll be hearing from his son, Arab, about his past 2 decades and a half in detention. Arab, thank you so much for speaking to Middle East Eye today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Arab, your father has been imprisoned for over 2 decades. Can you tell us a bit about what that imprisonment has been like, how he's been treated?
If I want to talk about this, I always say it's not part of my life, it's my whole life. We're talking about 24 years almost where my father is in prison. And if we want to talk about like the simple stuff, I haven't been able to touch my father, to hug him. He hasn't been there in any of the occasions, the special occasions of the family. He has 6 grandchildren that he's never met before, and that represents thousands and thousands of Palestinians who have been imprisoned for decades, let alone the illegality of his trial. My father was illegally tried, and these are not my words. These are the words of many legal independent bodies. And he has spent the 24 years. It had like years of solitary confinement. It had torture during his interrogation. It had many instances, and the hunger strike that he's led that was for 42 days just for the very basic human rights in the 2017. After October 7th, obviously the nightmare has been expanding and doubling on the families and the Palestinian detainees. Because my father has been targeted because of what he represents to the Palestinian people as a source of hope for a future leader of the Palestinian people, a unifying figure that is respected widely by all Palestinian factions and recognized nationally and internationally as an important voice for a future peace and stability and freedom, of course, of the Palestinian people.
And
After October 7th, he has been targeted multiple times. He was assaulted 7 times, to be exact. And mainly, he gets assaulted when he's getting moved from prison to prison through a unit called Nahshon unit. And that unit is very known for how vicious they are against Palestinian detainees while they're getting transferred. He got injured severely in many parts of his body, including, as we speak, he has 4 ribs, broken ribs since the assault on September of last year.
so you mentioned he's being targeted, being treated increasingly badly, beatings. I mean, 4 broken ribs, which is shocking. How has it gotten that severe? Why? Is it to do with a hardening of Israeli attitudes after October 7th? Is it due to, Ben Gvir's leadership in his ministerial position, really putting pressure on the treatment of prisoners? Why such harsh treatment of your father?
So we need to remember that this treatment against the Palestinian detainees has been there since 1967. We're talking about more than 850,000 Palestinians that have been imprisoned, close to 1 million. And many of them have been killed inside prison. You mentioned the number 110, and this is the documented cases only. We know that there are many more undocumented cases. It's part of the collective punishment. It started gradually getting worse since Ben Gvir took charge of the security ministry in Israel, which is responsible for the Palestinian detainees. And as part of the collective punishment of the Palestinian people that has been practiced right after October 7th, the Palestinian detainees have been targeted. My father in particular, because they wanted to show the Palestinian people that if we can humiliate your leader, we can humiliate you all. We need to remember that this is a leader that has been, they tried to assassinate him multiple times before they imprisoned him. So you need to imagine how his treatment has been.
So you see this abuse of prisoners as a form of collective punishment of the Palestinian people, but a way of doing so behind bars in kind of hidden facilities. I wonder then, with this ongoing abuse and mistreatment, with ongoing violence elsewhere in the occupied West Bank, we've seen settler violence against Palestinians. Do you really feel that the ceasefire that's been declared in Gaza, do you really think that represents a livable peace for Palestinians if there is so much violence still ongoing in all these other places?
No, of course not. I don't think any Palestinian would say that this is a livable peace. I don't think we can call it peace. Gazans are getting killed on daily basis. The people in the West Bank here, we're going through settler terrorism on daily basis. The Palestinians who live in Jerusalem go through ethnic cleansing on daily basis, ethnic cleansing campaigns. And the Palestinians who live inside Israel go through discrimination after discrimination on daily basis. I don't think that this is a sustainable peace. If you want to call it peace, maybe it's peace in Tel Aviv or in the Israeli cities at the moment. But when it comes to the Palestinian people, none of us are living in peace. I wake up as a family member of a Palestinian detainee with a fear of a daily nightmare that we might get a call that my father has been hurt even worse than he has. And just a few weeks ago, the family received a call from an anonymous call that was just to intimidate the family of talking about scary stuff that is happening with my father, just to terrorize the family. And this is something that I've grew up on, because the Israeli system makes sure that the family of the Palestinian detainees suffer as much as the detainee themselves. That you can see that when we go and visit them, strip searched, many checkpoints, waiting for 20 hours in order to see the prisoner for 45 minutes. We have glass between us, we can't touch. They humiliate them in front of us to send us a message that if you ever dare to speak out against the illegal occupation, this is your destiny. And then when we explode, we're the one that get blamed by the international community. So it's a lose-lose situation by the Palestinian people, but I don't think that will stop us.
So what you're saying is the abuse of these prisoners is not just about inflicting harm on them. It's about intimidating and kind of implicitly threatening anyone connected with them, families, loved ones, and so on, by kind of, I guess, would you say, making an example out of them, kind of?
Yes, exactly. I think, from my experience, I still remember the journeys that we used to go for, as I said, like between 20 to 25 hours, only for 45 minutes. And in those 20 hours, you're put outside the prison, you're under the sun or under the rain or anything like that. You're not allowed to leave. You're not allowed to have your phone. You're not allowed to talk to anyone until you see the prisoner themselves. It's 45 minutes. They keep bugging us. They keep coming and interrupting the visitation. And this is only one example. We're not allowed to touch, as I said. They're not allowed to see their, let's call them second degree relatives, like his grandchildren, that he was not allowed. I still remember his first grandchild. We brought her, she was 11 months old, and they kept her outside, and they refused to let her in. And these are just messages that are sent to us from a very young age.
That's a harrowing story, Arab, but very moving and very powerful, and very honest. Thank you so much, Arab, for sharing your experiences with MEE Live today. It's been a real privilege to hear from you.
Thank you.
Here to discuss why this abuse is so widespread and why so little has been done to hold its perpetrators to account is journalist Katie Halper.
Now, ME's witness testimonies pile onto mounting testimonies that Israeli prison guards are using sexual violence as a weapon of war, including a report from the UN Independent Commission of Inquiry almost a year ago. But while Palestinian survivors are speaking out, are they being heard? And are their testimonies being acted on? Here to talk about the global response is US political commentator Katie Halper from The Katie Halper Show. Welcome, Katie. Tell us, how much pickup has there been in international and US media about this issue of sexual violence in Israeli prisons?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. And also thank you to Middle East Eye for this important work that you're doing, because as we'll be discussing, unfortunately, there's been very little pickup. Famously, Western media parroted a story about a mass rape campaign that was allegedly committed by Hamas on October 7th. And of course, it turned out that that wasn't actually true, and all of the witnesses were debunked. It's important to remember that a lot of people who are Israel defenders will say, oh, what about believe women, listen to women? But the truth is this was not about anyone who claimed to have been abused. These were alleged eyewitnesses who it was later revealed were either not there or had made it up. Their claims were just debunked, and there was no evidence supporting it. So I just wanted to clarify that, because a lot of people who defend Israel will weaponize the Me Too movement or weaponize, caring about rape and sexual violence. And what we see time and time again is, whether it's corporate media or people like Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris and Sheryl Sandberg, or some of the biggest offenders are people like Jake Tapper and Dana Bash. They simply will not mention the allegations and even reports of sexual violence committed against Palestinians by Israelis. They only talk about the allegations made, even when they've been debunked. And they have not corrected the record. That's another incredibly important thing to mention and to remember, is that they've had time, obviously, to say that these claims were debunked, and they haven't done that. So what you have basically is you have a Western corporate media that reports on rape that didn't happen and ignores rape that did happen. And one famous case, notorious case, was when there was a Palestinian, and I hate to even call them a prisoner, because that kind of suggests that there's some rule of law that doesn't exist, of course, but a Palestinian who was detained. He was picked up on video. This video was leaked. He was dragged behind shields, like some kind of barrier. But what the Israeli soldiers did to him was so obviously sexual assault, rape, that Israeli media reported on it as rape. There was no debate about it. There was no wondering what was happening. And that's a fascinating thing, is that you will have Israeli media, because they dehumanize Palestinians in such an overt way, they will be more honest in many cases.
Katie, I'm sorry to jump
Western
in.
media.
I think we'll get onto that case you're talking about in Israeli media, but there's some of the stuff that you've just spoken about in terms of the US media, as you call it, the Western corporate media, that I think we need to dive into a little bit more. Just for clarification, there was a UN
Please
team.
interrupt me, because I know I go on.
Just for listeners
On
and
autopilot,
watchers,
so
for
infuriating.
clarification, in 2024, a UN team found that there were reasonable grounds to believe sexual violence was committed by some militants on October 7th, but there was no evidence for a coordinated campaign. The exact scope couldn't be established. And Katie, as you said, there were a number of witness testimonies that were completely debunked, that had been widely circulated and were not corrected in these media outlets that you identify. And I hear the point you're making as well about a double standard in the amount of coverage given to those at the time unverified accounts of rape allegedly by Palestinian militants, compared to these accounts of rape by Israeli soldiers. You mentioned Dana Bash there. Now, for anyone who doesn't know Dana Bash, she is a host on CNN. And I want to play a clip from a few weeks into the war on Gaza, when CNN host Dana Bash questioned US Representative Pramila Jayapal on this alleged sexual violence committed by Hamas during the October 7th attack. Let's take a look at the clip, and then Katie, feel free to come straight in with your reaction.
I want to ask you about sexual violence. And it's kind of remarkable that this issue hasn't gotten enough attention. Why is that?
I mean, I don't know that that's true. I think we always talk about the impact of war on women in particular. I think we have to be balanced about bringing in the outrages against Palestinians. Yeah. 15,000 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli airstrikes, 3/4 of whom are women and children.
And it's horrible, but you don't see Israeli soldiers raping
well, Dana, I think
women.
Katie.
Yeah, so that's a perfect example of not only unverified and baseless comments coming from alleged journalists, but also that's really instructive, because what we see Dana Bash doing there, and it's actually helpful that she's so overt about it, is she's engaging in what's called atrocity propaganda. And that's when you make up atrocities in order to manufacture consent. So in this case, she's making up atrocities committed by Hamas to justify in the minds of the American public the war, we know it's a genocide, but the war on Palestinians, the war on Hamas, that's how it was framed. Of course, we know this was a genocide, and it targeted civilians. There was no focused targeting of Hamas. So this is a perfect example, because what you do is you try to dehumanize the Palestinian as this savage rapist, and the very reason that she's doing that is so that she can deflect from Pramila Jayapal merely pointing out that maybe Dana Bash should talk about the Palestinian civilians who are being killed. So she's so overt about it. She basically says, I'm going to shift from your focus on civilians and pivot back to the fact that these Palestinians are rapists and the Israelis are not, and you don't see Israeli soldiers raping women. Of course, we do see Israeli soldiers raping men and women, and there was not evidence of Palestinians raping any Israelis. And I know I got really into the weeds before when I was speaking, but I just think it's so important to know that there were actual right to rape protests. When it was revealed that in that particular case, that man was sexually violated, raped, there were protests not against the rape or the rapists. There were protests when Israeli police detained the soldiers.
Yeah, so just to give some context to anyone watching, I think we have footage of the protest you're talking about. Last year in July, Israel saw large-scale protests over a leaked video that appeared to show Israeli soldiers sexually assaulting a Palestinian prisoner in Sde prison. But while many Israelis were outraged by the attack, there were crowds of others who stormed the prison, as you say, Katie, not in protest of the attack itself, but in protest of the arrest of the soldiers who committed or allegedly committed it. 5 of them are being investigated for severe abuse, not for rape. That's an ongoing trial. Actually, Israel's own finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, said that they should be treated like heroes, not villains. Now, is there anything that you can tell us about how Israel has reported on these testimonies of sexual violence by officials, by their military, that can help us to understand this kind of public reaction?
Well, I think that's actually not even a question of how they reported on the sexual abuse or violence. I think the reason that they were able to cover the sexual abuse and violence in a way that Western media was not able to is because they have so dehumanized Palestinians generally and through the media that it's actually acceptable to, in some ways, to do what they're doing to prisoners and detainees. And you actually had, again, there's this feedback loop, right? You have a media that communicates a message, then you have politicians who cite the media, and you also have politicians saying things, and then the media picks up on that, right? So what you have is this very kind of dangerous feedback loop. And so bringing it back to the politicians, in this particular case, you had a member of the Knesset saying it was legitimate to insert objects into someone's rectum. So you had a member of the Knesset publicly justifying what had been allegedly done to that prisoner. And I bring that up because, again, this speaks to the honesty that is sometimes applied in Israeli media that's not applied in Western media, precisely because although we in the West have had politicians who've said disgusting things about Palestinians, here we should turn it into Hiroshima, flatten it, turn it into a parking lot. We're not at the level here where we have politicians overtly justifying sexual violence of Palestinians, not yet at least. But I bring that up because that is the kind of ecosystem in which Israeli media functions, whereas Western media is not at that stage because they are complicit, but they're complicit but not explicit about the sexual violence that's being committed. And again, it is so infuriating, Matilda, to see the same politicians and media people that jumped on this story of sexual abuse. It would be one thing if they never corrected their false reporting, okay, but if they at least reported on what was alleged to have happened to Palestinians, that sexual violence. But the fact that they're silent about this, and there's no way Dana Bash and Jake Tapper at CNN don't know about this, precisely because Israeli media has reported on this. And it did penetrate Western media, but in such a mild way. If you look at the New York Times
it's
reporting
reported
on this,
digitally on CNN's webpage, but CNN World, but certainly has not had the kind of prominence that we've just seen for the reverse allegations.
And none of, exactly. And Jake Tapper and Dana Bash, who are these, very famous anchors, They have never reported on it. They've never even mentioned in their tweets, and they are pretty active on Twitter. But, you know, it is just stunning that they don't even pretend, the media or people like Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris and Sheryl Sandberg, they don't even pretend to care about sexual violence when it happens to Palestinians. They don't even have the decency to kind of pander and pretend that they care about it. It's so clear that for them, they don't actually care about sexual violence. They care about sexual violence when it fits their narrative and political goals. If you are a Palestinian who's raped or sexually violated, you're just not newsworthy. And when the New York Times did, by the way, again, this is just that particular example because it's a good kind of forensic case. When the New York Times did report on that story, they didn't use the word rape or sexual violence. The story of the Testimonies, which was caught on video later on, they didn't use the words rape or sexual violence, and the description of the sexual violence was paragraphs down, not in the headline.
Katie Halper, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And for today, that is all that we have time for. But before we lose you, we would love to hear from you.
Please send in your thoughts and questions to @MiddleEastEye on any social platform or email meelive@middleeasteye.net.
We'll be here at 5 p.m. GMT, noon in New York, every Tuesday and Thursday.
We'll see you then.